On the evening of December 14th, 1989, Elmridge was buried under thick fog and silence. In the Hale residence at the edge of town, 9-year-old Marissa Hale had just gone to bed. Her room was a cozy space filled with hanging glow stars and a shelf of cassette tapes she'd recorded on a toy tape deck. That cassette player, shaped like a blue bear, was her favorite possession. She'd talk to it for hours, narrating imaginary stories and singing lullabies only she could remember. Her parents, Deborah and Frank Hale, were downstairs cleaning up after dinner, both tired from a long day. At 9:38 p.m., Deborah checked on her daughter one last time. Marissa was curled under her blanket, the tape player still glowing red. Satisfied, Deborah turned off the hallway light and went to bed. But within the next 20 minutes, something shifted in the house. Not a crash or scream, but a change in pressure, as if the walls had inhaled and never exhaled. When Deborah awoke just past 10 with a strange sense of dread, she climbed the stairs again. The door was open wider than she remembered. The cassette player light was blinking, and the bed was empty. Deborah's heart pounded as she stepped into Marissa's room. The window above the bed was pushed open, letting in a chilling breeze that made the curtains sway like slow-moving ghosts. The blanket had been tossed aside, and Marissa's stuffed bear was lying face down on the rug. Deborah called out her daughter's name in a rising voice that cracked mid-syllable, but there was no response. She turned on the lights, hoping it was a prank, that Marissa was hiding in the closet, or under the bed, or had snuck down to the kitchen for a snack. But every drawer, corner, and hiding spot was empty. Panic surged through her as she screamed for Frank. He rushed in, his face turning pale as he took in the scene. Within minutes, they were calling the police. Deborah could barely hold the phone. "My daughter is gone," she repeated, her voice mechanical. The dispatcher asked for signs of forced entry, but there were none. No broken glass, no footprints, just a girl who had gone to sleep and disappeared into nothing. The only thing left was her cassette player, now silent on the nightstand, blinking as if waiting for someone to press play. Police arrived within 15 minutes and quickly cordoned off the room. Officers searched the house and surrounding property. Dogs were brought in, and helicopters were requested, though the fog made aerial efforts futile. The town awoke quickly to the news of a missing child, the first in Elmridge in over 2 decades. Neighbors, shocked and shaken, lined up to offer statements and assistance, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. There were no tire tracks in the gravel driveway, and no reports of strangers nearby. Detective Paul Rennick, a veteran with a decade in missing persons, led the initial search. He found the lack of struggle deeply disturbing. No broken latch, no torn curtain, not even a scuff on the floor, he muttered. This wasn't forced. It was clean, almost too clean. The only piece of evidence that felt even remotely out of place was a faint scent in the room, something metallic, just barely detectable beneath the lavender-scented fabric softener. It vanished as quickly as it came. By sunrise, the official report listed Marissa Hale as missing under suspicious circumstances. Deborah sat on the front steps, still in her nightgown, staring at nothing, repeating one sentence. She was just here. News spread beyond Elmridge by afternoon. Regional stations picked up the story, broadcasting images of Marissa's smiling face across local television. Volunteers poured in. Flyers were stapled to telephone poles and left in diners, libraries and gas stations. The Hales couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Frank began searching the woods alone every day, his boots soaked and blistered from walking miles with no direction. Deborah stayed home, sitting in Marissa's room, listening to her tapes. The recordings were innocent at first. Stories about animals, fake news broadcasts, and made-up songs. But on the last tape in the deck, recorded the night Marissa vanished, Deborah heard something different. The first 2 minutes were Marissa humming softly. Then a pause, and then a whisper. It was too faint to make out at first, like someone speaking from behind a wall. Deborah replayed it again and again. He's watching. The rest was static. She brought it to the police, but the audio was dismissed as degraded tape noise, not evidence. Deborah knew what she heard. From that moment, the toy was no longer a comfort. It became an obsession. The last thing her daughter touched before vanishing, and maybe the only thing still trying to speak. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. With no new leads and no physical evidence, the case slowly began to fade from headlines. People moved on. The Hales did not. Their marriage strained under the weight of guilt and unanswered questions. Frank became withdrawn, quiet. Deborah became consumed. She stopped going to work and spent every day cataloging Marissa's belongings, especially the cassette tapes. She took the toy recorder to audio engineers, private investigators, even paranormal experts, desperate for anyone to analyze the whisper. Some tried, most refused. One former sound technician amplified the audio and noticed a layered frequency, almost like another voice behind the whisper. But the quality was too low to isolate. Deborah clung to that one result as proof she wasn't imagining it. Meanwhile, the toy recorder remained on her nightstand, always blinking, always waiting. At times, she thought she heard it click by itself in the night. The police believed Marissa had been abducted by someone who knew the house well, maybe even someone in town. But Deborah had begun to suspect something else, something far worse, something no one was ready to believe. And it all started with that voice on the tape. 9 months after Marissa's disappearance, the Hale household felt like a museum frozen in time. The dishes on the shelf hadn't moved. The bedroom door remained half closed as it had that night. And Deborah still set a place for Marissa at the dinner table. Frank no longer questioned these rituals. He rarely spoke at all. He spent long hours walking aimlessly through town or in the woods behind their house, hoping to find a clue everyone else had missed. Deborah, on the other hand, had turned inward. Her life now revolved around the tapes. She catalogued them by date, sound quality, and any discernible words. She played them each morning and again before bed, desperate for a shift, a new sound, a voice. One afternoon, as summer rain pattered against the windows, she played the same final tape again. But this time, the tape snagged. The player made a small clicking sound, and the pitch slowed unnaturally. Through the distortion, a voice emerged, clearer than ever. It wasn't Marissa's. It was a low, male voice, whispering again. Deborah leaned in. This time, it said, "She sees me now." Her breath caught. The tape snapped in the deck. Silence returned. But something had changed. Deborah brought the broken tape to a retired audio forensic analyst named Benjamin Cross, someone recommended by a woman in her grief support group. Benjamin had once worked for a federal agency, analyzing distorted surveillance and emergency recordings. He greeted her with curiosity, not skepticism, and agreed to review the tape fragments. Over the next few days, he managed to splice together a partial digital copy from the warped cassette. His conclusion was chilling. The background whisper wasn't ambient noise. It had layered frequency bands that suggested intentional speech manipulation, something altered in post-recording or through an unknown process. But what struck him more was the voice's proximity to the microphone. It wasn't far from her when it was recorded, he said. Whatever she picked up was inches away. Deborah's hands trembled as she asked if it could be interference or a prank. Benjamin shook his head. This wasn't radio bleed. This was there, in the room. He burned the audio to a USB drive and handed it to her. You need to be careful who you share this with. That night, Deborah played the file alone. Headphones on, room dark, heart pounding. And for the first time, she heard breathing. Deep, deliberate, just before the voice. As Deborah grew more convinced that the recording held clues no one else could hear, the Elm Ridge Police Department became increasingly reluctant to revisit the case. Detective Rennick had transferred out 6 months earlier, replaced by a younger officer named Kyle Barrett, who viewed the Hale case as tragic but cold. When Deborah requested to reopen parts of the investigation, Barrett gently dismissed her concerns. We combed everything, Mrs. Hale. I know it's hard, but there's nothing new to act on. He glanced at the USB on her lap, like it was a piece of junk mail. Frustrated and grieving, Deborah left the station determined to go around them. She visited a local librarian, Mrs. Elkins, who helped her access archived reports about similar cases. One stood out, a missing girl in 1972, just 2 blocks from where the Hales live now. Her name was Evelyn Carter, aged 9, gone without a trace. The case was never solved. The similarities were uncanny. No signs of entry, no witnesses, no sound. Deborah's pulse quickened as she copied every file she could find. Something was repeating itself in Elm Ridge, and it was doing so with surgical silence. She wasn't imagining it. She was uncovering it. Deborah kept digging. She traced Evelyn Carter's family, now long gone from Elm Ridge, and discovered that the girl's mother, Miriam, had spent several years institutionalized after the case was closed. The reason? Obsession with recorded voices in her daughter's room. The parallels made Deborah's skin crawl. She requested old case photos from the county archives and saw something she wasn't prepared for. In one image of Evelyn's bedroom, placed on her nightstand, was a small object, a toy cassette recorder, nearly identical to Marissa's. Same model, same color. Deborah stared at the photo for nearly an hour. She hadn't told anyone about Marissa's toy, not in any police report, not even at the support group. How could a girl from 1972 have had the same recorder, a model not released until the late 80s? She drove straight to Benjamin's house with the photo. He examined it and confirmed her fear. This recorder didn't exist back then. Someone's lying, or something's different. That night, Deborah couldn't sleep. The recorder on her nightstand blinked once, then again. She hadn't pressed play. It was responding to something else. Maybe proximity, or memory. Or worse, maybe it was waiting for her to listen, determined not to become like Miriam Carter, dismissed, institutionalized, forgotten. Deborah began to document everything with methodical precision. She created a wall of evidence in her basement, stringing together photographs, timelines, and locations of other missing children from nearby counties. There were more than she expected, all roughly 9 years apart, all around the same age, all vanishing without a trace. Often from locked rooms or safe homes, a pattern was forming, one the police had never acknowledged or perhaps refused to see. Deborah added Marissa's photo to the timeline, then Evelyn's, then a girl from 1963 named Helena Moore. The gap was too precise to ignore. Every 9 years, always in December. She circled the next predicted year in red, 2007. It was still nearly a decade away, but Deborah knew she had little time to prove what was happening before the cycle claimed another child. She turned to the recorder again. It had stopped blinking. She pressed play. Nothing. She pressed rewind. Static. Just before she turned it off, she heard a fragment, the sound of Marissa's laugh. Not one she remembered. Something distorted and wrong. It faded into silence like breath being held just beneath the surface. 3 days after discovering the pattern in disappearances, Deborah received a package without a return address. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, the only marking being her name typed in all caps on the front. Inside was a cassette tape labeled simply 1972. Her hands trembled as she placed it into an old player Benjamin had lent her. The audio began with static, then soft humming, a child's voice. Deborah felt a chill when she recognized the melody. It was the same lullaby Marissa used to sing into her recorder. The exact tune, note for note. The child's voice was not Marissa's, yet it carried the same rhythm and subtle fear beneath each syllable. Then came a second voice, low and indecipherable, whispering something that made the player briefly seize up before continuing. Deborah rewound and played it again, over and over, writing down the phonetic sound of each distorted word. She brought the tape to Benjamin, who immediately digitized and enhanced it. The voice, when slowed and reversed, said one phrase, "She's almost ready." Deborah stepped back from the desk, goosebumps crawling up her arms. Whoever sent the tape had access to something old, something preserved, and they wanted her to hear it. Benjamin suggested comparing the voice on the 1972 tape with the one on Marissa's final recording. He ran spectral analysis software and aligned the waveforms. When the graphs appeared, his face went pale. "It's the same voice," he whispered. "Same vocal frequency, same pattern of breath, even the same cadence." Deborah didn't know whether to feel terrified or vindicated. The voice was identical, recorded 17 years apart, attached to 2 different girls who never met. "This isn't a man," Benjamin muttered. "This isn't human. At least not anymore." Deborah tried to hold on to logic, but the facts were turning against her. She'd entered this journey as a grieving mother. Now she was charting something darker, something methodical. She asked Benjamin what he thought "she's almost ready" meant. He stared at the waveform on the screen, watching the heartbeat-like pulse move in cycles. "I think it means whatever it is. It's not done. It's preparing something. Or someone." That night, Deborah didn't sleep. She lay awake beside the blinking recorder, feeling its presence as if it were alive. And at 3:12 a.m., she heard the machine click, not once, but twice, as if confirming it had just recorded something new. The next morning, Deborah rushed to Benjamin's office with the cassette. He connected it to his equipment, transferring the new recording into high-resolution audio. At first, it was quiet. Then came the breathing. The same deep inhale and exhale, paced evenly like it was waiting. But this time, there was something else layered beneath. A faint scratching sound, like fingers dragging slowly across fabric. Benjamin enhanced the frequencies and isolated the background. What emerged made both of them lean in, horrified. It was Marissa's voice, not singing, not speaking, crying, quiet rhythmic sobs. Deborah clutched her chest. That's her. That's my daughter. Benjamin nodded, transfixed. But this wasn't recorded before. This is new. This was recorded last night. He checked the player's timestamp. 3:12 a.m. Exactly when Deborah had heard the click. She hadn't imagined it. The machine had picked up a signal. But from where? The sobs stopped suddenly, replaced by the familiar whisper. She still sees. Deborah stared at the speaker, feeling like her daughter wasn't just missing. She was somewhere just out of reach, watching through something none of them could understand. And someone, or something, was letting her speak, for reasons they hadn't yet begun to grasp. Desperate for answers, Deborah returned to the town archives. She requested any audio files or analog evidence connected to the 1972 Evelyn Carter case. The clerk was reluctant, citing privacy concerns, but Deborah showed her a copy of the missing person timeline and whispered, "There's a pattern. I'm not asking. I'm warning." After a tense silence, the clerk returned with a cardboard box. Inside were several unlabeled cassettes and a few photos. One image caught Deborah's eye, a police officer interviewing Evelyn's mother in front of her house. The officer's name tag read, J. Merrow. Deborah felt the name pulse in her memory. At home, she searched old directories and found that a retired officer, Jack Merrow, still lived on the outskirts of Elmridge. She drove there that afternoon, heart pounding. The house was surrounded by trees and almost invisible from the road. She knocked twice. A curtain twitched. A lock turned. An old man opened the door slowly, his face sunken but alert. "You're here about the voice, aren't you?" he asked before she could speak. Deborah froze. "Yes," she whispered. Merrow stepped aside. "Then you better come in now, before it realizes you're getting close." Inside, Officer Merrow's house was cluttered with paper files, old tape machines, and newspaper clippings going back over 40 years. Deborah scanned the walls and saw photos of missing children, not just from Elmridge, but surrounding towns too. "I tried to warn them," Merrow said, pouring tea with shaking hands. No one listened. He explained that he had heard the same voice on Evelyn Carter's cassette recordings, a voice that sounded too old to belong to anyone near her. "It's always female, always whispering, always speaking in future tense," he said. "It doesn't threaten. It predicts." Deborah asked what it meant. Merrow looked at her with tired eyes. "It's grooming. It visits children just before they disappear, and it speaks through what they love most. The cassette player, the toy, the object children carry with them." Deborah's pulse raced. "So you think Marissa heard it first?" Merrow nodded. "She heard it. She recorded it. And now, it's trying to come back through you." Deborah stepped back, clutching the recorder in her bag. Merrow leaned forward. "If it's talking again, it means something is happening soon, and this time, it doesn't want to be stopped." Deborah returned home with Merrow's words circling her thoughts like vultures. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she laid the cassette recorder on the kitchen table, placed a fresh blank tape inside, and pressed record. Then she sat across from it, staring at the blinking red light, as if it were an eye that could blink back. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The house was silent. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., the recorder clicked. Not by Deborah's hand. The red light turned off, then on again. Deborah didn't move. She simply whispered, "I'm listening," into the air. When she played the recording back, it started with her own breath, then a pause, and then a voice, soft, female, but not Marissa's. "You're closer now," it said. But she's still afraid. Deborah's hands trembled. The voice continued. "She sees you, through the glass, through the light, but she can't speak long." Then came static, followed by the unmistakable sound of a child calling out, faint but distinct. "Mom?" Deborah dropped the recorder. She hadn't heard that voice in 9 months. Her daughter was trying to speak, but it wasn't only her voice on the tape. Something else was layered underneath, breathing with her. The next morning, Deborah drove to Benjamin's lab with the new tape. As soon as she walked in, he knew something had changed. She played the recording for him, watching his eyes narrow at the voice. He didn't speak until it ended. "We're not dealing with just a signal," he said finally. "This is a response. Something is answering you now." He adjusted the frequency ranges and filtered the tape into separate channels. What he uncovered was disturbing. Behind Marissa's mum, there was a pulse, not audio interference, but a repeated rhythmic thump. Benjamin slowed it down and amplified it. It sounded like a heartbeat, but it was too slow for a child, too deep. Deborah stared at the waveform. "Is that alive?" she asked. Benjamin didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "Whatever it is, it's not mechanical." They sat in silence, staring at the screen pulsing with that low, inhuman rhythm. Benjamin turned to her. "If this is biological, it means it's near you, or it's using something near you." Deborah suddenly remembered the blinking light. Not just at home, at Merrow's house, at the library, always at the same time. 3:12. The hour it speaks, the hour it listens. Deborah and Benjamin decided to set up a controlled test. That evening, they placed the recorder inside a soundproof room at Benjamin's lab, connected to multiple sensors and digital monitors. No people, no light, no noise. Just a device, a blank tape, and a single red light recording in total silence. They left it running overnight and returned just after sunrise. The tape had stopped at exactly 3:15 a.m. Deborah played it immediately. At first, nothing, just quiet static. Then came the now familiar breath. Then a single phrase whispered with icy clarity, "You left her alone." Deborah's stomach twisted. The voice was accusing, personal. The static thickened and then another voice layered in, one she hadn't heard before, a male voice, harsh and distorted. "She belongs to us now." Benjamin paled. "There's more than one," he whispered. Deborah nodded slowly. "And they're not just watching. They're waiting." That day, they played the recording frame by frame, searching for variations in the signal. And at the 3:14 mark, for one brief second, the screen flashed a strange frequency spike. Benjamin ran it through a visualizer. It translated into an image, a crude outline of a window with 2 small handprints pressed against the glass. The image of the handprints haunted Deborah long after she left the lab. That night, she removed every curtain in the house, every mirror, every piece of glass. She couldn't stop picturing Marissa on the other side of something invisible, reaching out, unable to cross. Deborah placed the recorder on the floor by Marissa's bed and slept there herself. Just before drifting off, she thought she heard the floor creak, not in the hall, right beside her, but when she opened her eyes, the room was empty. The next morning, she reviewed the night's tape. It was filled with silence except for one moment, A single knock, soft and close. Then a sound like fingertips brushing across the microphone. She froze the audio, enhanced it. The whisper returned. She's almost through. Deborah pressed pause. Almost through what? A door, a wall, a barrier. She realized she didn't know what she was asking, or what she was inviting. At 3:12 that following night, she sat with the recorder again. But this time, she whispered, "Let her go." The device responded instantly. "She's not held. She's chosen." Deborah's heart stopped. Marissa hadn't been taken. She had crossed willingly. But why? Deborah returned to Merrow's house, this time unannounced, holding the latest tape. He listened silently, his eyes not moving from the recorder. When the final whisper played, "She's chosen," Merrow shut it off. "This is further than I ever got," he said. "You're inside the pattern now." Deborah demanded to know what he meant. Merrow lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "It always starts the same. A voice, a blinking light. The missing child. But it ends differently. Sometimes the parent goes missing next. Sometimes it's the investigator. But always, someone else gets drawn in." He pointed to Deborah's bag. "You brought it back here. You shouldn't have." Deborah felt her blood run cold. "What happens if I keep listening?" Merrow exhaled smoke slowly. "You won't be able to stop." She left shaken, but not afraid. She was past fear. That night, she didn't press record. The tape started anyway. No clicks, no button. Just the blinking light, and Marissa's voice saying, "Please don't forget me." Deborah broke down, but under her sobs, a second voice whispered clearly, "It's not her you should be crying for." The line cut. The tape stopped. The light blinked once. Then everything went still. The next morning, Deborah found herself standing in front of her basement evidence wall, staring at the timeline she had built so carefully. Her eyes moved from Marissa's photo to Evelyn Carter's, then to Helena Moore from 1963. All gone in December. All at the age of 9. The cassette recorder sat silently on the table beside her, as if it were waiting for her to ask a question it already knew the answer to. Deborah reached out and slowly rewound the most recent tape, the one that had started on its own the night before. This time, she let it play from the very beginning. What she heard chilled her to the bone. The voice that said, "Please don't forget me," was undeniably Marissa's. But the tone, the inflection, was off, like someone trying too hard to sound like a child. A few seconds later, the second voice returned. "She's not who you remember. She's part of us now." Deborah slammed the player off. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. Whatever was speaking wasn't just trying to manipulate her. It was testing her, trying to see how far she'd go to bring Marissa back. Determined not to be toyed with any longer, Deborah reached out to a woman she had read about in one of Merrow's archived clippings, Dr. Lena Marquez, a fringe researcher who had studied frequency anomalies in missing persons cases. Though ridiculed by mainstream academia, Dr. Marquez had once identified unexplained audio signals that appeared in multiple child disappearances across the country. Deborah tracked her down to a remote research cabin in the Colorado Hills. Over a crackling phone line, Deborah played the recording from 3:12 a.m. Dr. Marquez listened quietly, then asked only one question. Did the voice start after a dream or before it? Deborah was caught off guard. "I wasn't dreaming," she said. Lena responded flatly. "Then you're not the first contact. You're the second layer." The phrase meant little to Deborah at first, But when she arrived at the cabin 3 days later, Lena explained everything. The signal doesn't just speak, it prepares. One layer manipulates the child, the next tries to rewrite the parent, and once that's done, the gate opens. Deborah realized with horror that she had already crossed into that second layer. And whatever the third layer was, it hadn't arrived yet. Dr. Marquez examined the audio files, comparing them against her library of known anomalous frequencies. She matched Marissa's crying to a similar sobbing sound captured in a 1981 case from Pennsylvania, where another child had vanished from her locked bedroom. The frequency spikes in both recordings were nearly identical, but the deeper pattern emerged when Lena layered several whisper samples from across the decades. The waveform structure formed something strange, a pulse that mirrored the brainwave of a child in REM sleep. "It's using their dreams to open something," she said. "And their toys. Those are just the portals." Deborah sat frozen. The cassette recorder had always been more than sentimental. It was a conduit. "What happens when it opens?" Deborah asked. Lena's face hardened. "We don't know, because the few who got that far disappeared too." Deborah begged for a way to shut it off, to sever the connection before it reached full signal. Lena said only one thing might work: a disruption at the source. "You'll need to return to the beginning, where the first message started. That's the only place it's vulnerable." For Deborah, that meant going back to Marissa's room and facing the exact moment everything began. That night, armed with equipment from Lena's lab, EM field readers, frequency disruptors, and a modified recorder rigged to detect real-time interference, Deborah returned to her home in Elmridge. She entered Marissa's room slowly, as if the walls themselves might breathe. Every item remained exactly where it had been the night Marissa vanished. She placed the recorder on the windowsill and turned on the disruptor. The air in the room immediately changed. It was subtle, like the pressure had dropped. Then the lights flickered. Deborah sat on the bed and whispered, "I'm here. I know what you are." For a long time, there was nothing. Then, from the speaker, "You left the door open." Deborah shivered. The phrase wasn't a taunt. It was an accusation. The window glass clouded over, as if something breathed from the other side. A faint knocking began, soft and slow, like a child tapping. The disruptor buzzed sharply. Lena's instructions echoed in Deborah's mind. "If it responds physically, do not engage. Let it speak. Do not answer." The knocking stopped. The voice returned, but this time it wasn't Marissa's or the whisper. It was Deborah's own voice, distorted and reversed, saying something she never remembered recording. The sound of her own reversed voice replayed over and over, saying the same warped phrase. "Let her through, Deborah. Let her through." Deborah's stomach turned. She had never recorded those words. She'd never even spoken them. The recorder clicked, and the red light began blinking rapidly. Not its usual calm rhythm, but fast and erratic like a warning beacon. Deborah stood frozen in the center of the room as shadows lengthened unnaturally across the walls. The EM reader surged. The air became heavy, thick with pressure. And then came the sound of tiny footsteps above her, from the attic. Steps far too light to be Frank's, too deliberate to be Rat's. Deborah bolted for the hallway, climbing the ladder to the attic, hand trembling as she pushed open the hatch. The space was pitch black. She aimed the flashlight. Sitting in the center of the attic, facing away from her, was Marissa's teddy bear, and beside it, her cassette recorder, one Deborah thought she had downstairs, except this one was blinking too. She stepped closer. The bear's head slowly tilted, as if reacting to her presence. The recorder clicked. Then her daughter's voice echoed, "Mommy, he's still here." Deborah stood frozen at the attic entrance, the flashlight trembling in her grip. The voice had come from the recorder beside the stuffed bear, but it had echoed across the attic walls as if the room itself had spoken. Her breath fogged in the cold air despite the summer night outside. She forced herself forward, one step at a time, until she stood just behind the toy. With a trembling hand, she reached out and pressed the play button. The recorder responded instantly. "He's still here," Marissa's voice repeated, then paused. "He never left." Deborah's heart pounded. She picked up the bear, its fur stiff with dust, and examined it. There was something inside, something hard sewn into the back seam. Using a penknife, she carefully opened the stitching and removed a small microcassette, labeled in faded ink, December 13th. That was the night before Marissa disappeared. Deborah descended from the attic, clutching the tape, and immediately called Benjamin. He met her within the hour. Together, they played the tape on his multi-track equipment. The recording began with humming, then Marissa whispering softly, "He said if I go with him, I can still see you." Deborah covered her mouth. The voice that followed wasn't human. The voice that followed Marissa's whisper on the attic tape was slow, garbled and low, like something trying to imitate speech but not quite getting it right. Benjamin looped the segment, analyzing the cadence. It wasn't English, at least not fully, but certain words repeated. "Open, gate, remember, promise." Deborah could barely stand to hear it. "It's like it's speaking directly to her," she said, "but also to me." Benjamin confirmed something strange. The voice's audio signature didn't match human vocal patterns. "It's subharmonic," he explained, "below what a human throat can produce, which means either it's synthetic or something else." They ran a reverse analysis and discovered another layer of audio, a second voice buried beneath the first. When isolated, it sounded younger, female, terrified, whispering a phrase. "Don't listen to him." Benjamin leaned back in his chair. This might be Marissa's real voice, hidden under the thing pretending to be her. Deborah stared at the waveform. Then, the voice on the other tapes. "It's been lying to me this whole time." She felt sick. If that voice wasn't Marissa, then what had she been talking to every night at 3:12? Deborah begged Benjamin to help her trace the source of the signal, to find where the cassette players had been receiving whatever force was speaking through them. Benjamin explained that the kind of interference involved wasn't something that could be traced like a normal radio signal, but if it was being transmitted physically through the environment, then there might be a pattern of hotspots. He set up a series of synchronized recorders around the Hale home, in the woods, and even in Marissa's old elementary school, all set to begin recording at precisely 3:12 a.m. The first night, nothing unusual happened. The second night, however, something chilling occurred. Every recorder in every location picked up the same sound at the exact same time. A faint melody, like a child's lullaby played on a broken music box. It lasted 14 seconds, then static, then silence. The tune matched a song Deborah remembered Marissa singing only once, at age 4, while staring blankly at the hallway wall. "Where did you learn that?" Deborah had asked back then. Marissa had only smiled and said, "He taught me." Deborah had forgotten that moment until now. The signal wasn't random. It was reaching out from somewhere it had already been. On the third night of recordings, only one recorder activated, the one placed in the woods behind the Hale residence. It captured more than just music. First came the same lullaby, slower and distorted. Then, a soft rustling sound, as if someone, or something, were moving just beyond the tree line. Then a whisper, so faint it was almost lost in the wind. "She's coming through." Benjamin enhanced the audio, isolating the frequencies, and discovered something that made his skin crawl. A voice, Marissa's, but layered in reverse and forward at the same time, crying and laughing simultaneously. "That's not an accident," he said. "That's intentional overlap. Whoever, whatever is doing this knows how to manipulate how we hear." Deborah remembered what Lena had said. It speaks through what they love most. The trees behind her home had always been Marissa's favorite place. A small wooden swing still hung from the tallest oak. Deborah went outside alone that night. At exactly 3:12, she stood beneath that swing, recorder in hand. The air turned still. Her breath stopped. The swing moved on its own, and from behind her, she heard a giggle, not playful, possessive. The next morning, Deborah returned to the woods. In the soft dirt near the swing, she found small footprints, too small to be hers. Barefoot and facing the house, she followed them a short distance until they simply stopped, vanishing into undisturbed ground. She placed the recorder on the swing and returned to the lab. When they played it back, the tape opened with 30 seconds of silence, then a heartbeat. Faint, but present. Then Marissa's voice, different this time, clear, direct. "He lied. I didn't choose this." Deborah's hands shook. The voice continued. "He said if I stayed, I could protect you. But I can't hold him much longer." Static flared, followed by another voice, the low, synthetic whisper they'd heard before. "You open the door. She stays. You stay." Then a sound like breathing through water. The tape ended. Benjamin looked pale. "It's escalating." Deborah stood slowly, her face hardening. "Then I'll go to the door myself." Benjamin tried to stop her. "We don't know what's on the other side." Deborah didn't blink. "She's still in there, and if she's fighting, I'm not leaving her alone." She walked out, recorder in hand. She was going back to where the veil was thinnest. Deborah returned that night to the attic, the space where Marissa's final message had first emerged. She carried only a flashlight, the stitched-up bear, and a newly cleaned cassette recorder. The air felt denser than before, as if something was waiting. She placed the recorder on the wooden floor, sat cross-legged beside it, and whispered, "I'm ready." Nothing responded. Minutes passed. Then the room shifted. The temperature dropped sharply. Dust swirled in slow circles, even without wind. And then, softly, the recorder clicked. But it didn't blink red. It pulsed blue. Deborah had never seen that before. The device made a low whirring sound and began playing on its own. A familiar voice came through, but not Marissa's. It was Deborah's own, reciting lullabies she hadn't sung in decades. Her voice on the tape was calm, warm, full of life. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." And then it stopped. A new voice took over, mimicking her exact tone. Same song, same pace, but hollow, off-key, a parody of motherhood. The bear in Deborah's lap felt heavier. She turned it over and gasped, The red thread she'd sewn earlier had come undone, though she hadn't touched it. Something else had. Deborah grabbed the bear and looked inside again. The original microcassette was still there, but beside it now sat something new. A folded piece of aged paper that hadn't been there before. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a drawing, crude, childlike. It showed a little girl standing at a window. Behind her was a tall figure, faceless, shrouded in shadows. Above them, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "If I move, he finds you." Deborah stared at the drawing, the air thick with dread. She remembered a time Marissa had refused to change rooms, even when offered a larger one downstairs. "I like the window," she'd said. "I can watch him." Deborah hadn't thought much of it then. A child's imagination. Now she wasn't sure. She placed the paper next to the recorder, pressed record and whispered, "Marissa, is he with you now?" Silence followed, then breathing, then a whisper, "He never left." Deborah's pulse quickened. "What does he want?" she asked. The reply came fast. "To come through." Deborah stared at the recorder. "Through what?" she asked, but the response was not a word. It was the sound of knocking from inside the attic walls. The knocking grew louder, sharper, until the walls themselves seemed to groan under the pressure. Deborah backed away slowly, her flashlight flickering. The recorder clicked again. Playback mode initiated on its own. Marissa's voice returned, this time laced with panic. "Mom, I can't hold him. He's using me. He says I'm the key." Deborah felt as if the floor shifted beneath her. "The key to what?" she whispered. "To the gate," Marissa replied. The knocking stopped. Everything fell into silence. Then, the attic trapdoor slammed shut beneath her. Deborah spun around. She was sealed inside. The recorder kept playing. A new voice took over, the one they feared most. It spoke slowly, like savoring each word. She opened it from the inside. "Now open it from yours." Deborah screamed, "No!" and slammed the stop button. It didn't work. The recorder glowed brighter, the tape reels spinning backward. Images began flashing in her mind. Memories not her own. Other children, other mothers. Different decades, all crying out through devices like hers, all fading into silence. Then, a whisper in her ear, close and human. "You let her go once. Don't do it again." In desperation, Deborah pulled out a phone and called Benjamin. No signal. She tried opening the attic door again, but it wouldn't budge. She banged on it until her hands ached. Then, in the corner of the room, something shifted. A sliver of the wood paneling loosened, revealing a narrow crawl space. Trembling but determined, she crawled inside, dragging the recorder with her. The passage was tight, suffocating, and completely dark. The walls pulsed with warmth, like the inside of a living thing. As she crawled, the cassette began to play again. This time, no voice, just a heartbeat. Faster than before. Desperate, then came Marissa's sobs. Not distant like before, close, immediate. Deborah followed the sound until the crawl space opened into a small, windowless chamber she had never seen before. At the center was a chair. On it sat Marissa's backpack, the one she'd vanished with. Deborah dropped to her knees and clutched it. It was real, tangible, but when she opened it, inside was another recorder, identical to hers, but dripping with moisture. She pressed play. Marissa's voice whispered, "This is the last place I was alive." The words struck Deborah like a blade. The last place I was alive. She held the wet recorder, the plastic casing cold as ice, and looked around the chamber. Symbols lined the walls, unfamiliar shapes that shimmered faintly when touched. She pressed her hand to one, and the attic above groaned again. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. Deborah realized this space was beneath their home, and that the gate, whatever it was, had been here all along. She knelt by the recorder, tears in her eyes, and spoke directly into it. "Marissa, if you're here, guide me. Tell me what to do." For a moment, nothing. Then, her daughter's voice returned, steady but fading. "He's using me to stay. You have to break it." Burned the voice. Deborah looked down at both recorders. One was hers, one was his. She couldn't tell which was which, and she knew choosing wrong meant losing Marissa forever. Suddenly, from the hallway above, Benjamin's voice called out faintly, "Deborah, I'm here." Deborah gasped. He had come, but so had something else. From behind her, footsteps began echoing in the chamber. Slow, deliberate, and not human. Deborah spun around, heart racing as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind her. But when she turned her flashlight toward the narrow crawl space, nothing was there. Just darkness, thick and unmoving. She clutched both recorders in her hands, still unsure which one held Marissa's voice, and which held the parasite that had been speaking to her all this time. Benjamin's voice called again, louder now, coming from somewhere above. "Deborah, I found the attic open. Are you down there?" She ran back through the crawl space, her knees scraped and aching, until she reached the trap door. This time, when she pushed, it gave way with ease. Benjamin stood at the edge, eyes wide with worry. She pulled herself up, gasping. "I found her backpack. I heard her voice. It's still here." Benjamin helped her stand, but his eyes narrowed at the two identical recorders in her hands. "We have to destroy one," he said, "but not both. If we lose hers, she's gone." Deborah hesitated. They couldn't hear the tapes anymore, not with the things interfering. They had to choose based on intuition. Benjamin stared at her. "You'll know. You're her mother." Deborah stepped back. One recorder blinked red. The other blinked blue. Deborah stared at the blinking lights, red and blue, as if they were hearts beating outside of bodies. The red had always meant recording. The blue, she had only seen once. The night in the attic. The night it began responding without her touch. Benjamin whispered, "Whichever one she used last, that's the one we keep." But Deborah's mind spun. The creature had been mimicking her daughter. It could imitate blinking patterns too. "What if it knows that?" she asked. Benjamin frowned. "Then we trust her voice, not the color." Deborah knelt, placing both recorders side by side. "Marissa," she whispered, "if you can hear me, show me." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the red light flickered, once, twice, then held steady. The blue light, once pulsing, dimmed. "It's a trick," Benjamin said. "Or it's her," Deborah shot back. Her hands hovered. She reached for the blue recorder but froze. From it came a low growl, almost mechanical, like a broken engine forcing out words. "You failed her once. You'll do it again." Deborah recoiled. She grabbed the red recorder and pressed it to her chest. "That's her," she whispered. "That's my daughter." The blue recorder began to shake violently in her hand. Without hesitation, Benjamin took the blue recorder, stuffed it into a metal toolbox, and slammed the lid shut. He doused it in accelerant from the emergency kit he always kept in his trunk. Deborah watched, holding the red recorder tightly as Benjamin lit a match. The flame flickered, then roared as it engulfed the box. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the screaming began. Not human, not animal. Something caught between worlds. The flame burned blue, then white, then silence. The box collapsed into ash. Deborah fell to her knees, shaking. "Was that it?" she whispered. Benjamin crouched beside her. "We won't know until the next 3:12. That night, they stayed awake together in the Hale living room, red recorder on the coffee table. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. came and went. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the recorder clicked, gently. A soft humming filled the room. Marissa's voice. Pure. Unbroken. "I can see you, Mummy. The door's closing." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you safe?" she asked. The voice replied, barely above a whisper. "I'm not cold anymore." Then the tape stopped. The red light blinked once and went dark. Deborah held the recorder close. For the first time in 9 months, she slept without fear. In the days that followed, Deborah and Benjamin worked to dismantle every remaining recorder around the property. The signals had gone silent. No more humming. No more whispers. The swing in the backyard no longer moved at night. The attic felt still again, and the wall in the basement chamber, the one with the strange glowing symbols, had turned completely dark. As they scraped the markings away, they found only aged wood beneath, untouched by whatever presence had seeped through before. Benjamin took the remaining tapes and stored them in an underground vault at Lena Marquez's research cabin, far from Elmridge. "This isn't just about your daughter," Lena said. "It never was. You got lucky. Others won't." Deborah agreed, but her focus had shifted. She knew Marissa was no longer trapped, no longer mimicked. She had crossed somewhere, and the thing pretending to be her was burned away. Still, one final mystery haunted her. Inside the bear, after all of it, she found one more tape. It had no label, no writing. When she played it, it was only breathing. Slow, deep, waiting. Deborah didn't burn it. She locked it in a safe, just in case the gate ever opened again. Weeks later, Deborah sat in Marissa's room, sunlight streaming through the curtains. The walls no longer felt heavy. The floor no longer creaked without reason. She had cleaned the room carefully, preserving what needed to be saved and letting go of what didn't. Marissa's backpack now sat on the bookshelf, beside a framed photo of her smiling with a missing front tooth. The red recorder was there too, unplugged, batteries removed, but still holding the weight of her daughter's last words. Deborah had begun to heal, slowly, one morning at a time. She knew she might never fully understand what had taken her daughter or what had used her voice, but she had stopped it, and she had brought Marissa back, not in body, but in freedom. Late one night, as she dozed off in the living room, a breeze slipped through the open window. The curtains moved gently. She jolted awake, her eyes darting toward the coffee table. Nothing moved, but faintly, very faintly, from the shelf in Marissa's room, a single sound echoed once more, the click of a recorder, then silence. Deborah rose, walked toward it, and whispered into the quiet. "I remember." 3 months passed in near silence. No more recordings. No more whispers at 3:12. Deborah began to believe it was truly over. She returned to part-time work at the local library, reconnected with her sister in upstate New York, and started therapy with a grief counselor who didn't ask about spirits or voices. Still, something clung to her in quiet moments. The way light flickered when she passed certain rooms, or the cold chill that returned each time she touched the red recorder. One morning, she received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, a grainy still image from a 1991 missing persons case. A girl named Emily Rhodes who vanished in Michigan. The girl was standing beside a bed, her hand pressed to a window. Deborah stared at the image, stunned. Behind the girl, barely visible in the grain, was a cassette recorder, identical model, same red blinking light, same December date, the same age. Deborah clutched the photo as a single thought crept into her mind. The pattern hadn't ended. It had simply moved, and someone, or something, had just invited her to see it again. That evening, Deborah met with Benjamin at a quiet diner off Route 7. She slid the photo across the table without a word. He stared at it, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to dread. "That's the same model," he said quietly. "Same one Marissa had. And the same signature date." Deborah nodded. Emily Rhodes, age 9, vanished December 14, 1991. No forced entry, just like the others. Benjamin leaned back, processing. But that was Michigan, entirely different state. Why would they send this to you now? Deborah didn't know. But as she opened her purse to retrieve the red recorder, something else fell out. A second photograph she had never seen. This one showed a different girl, a different year, but the same pose, the same device. Benjamin froze. "Deborah, where did you get that?" She shook her head. "I didn't. It was never in my bag." They sat in silence, the diner's soft jazz unable to drown the sense of something vast stirring again. "It's reaching out," Benjamin said finally. "Not just through recorders, through us." Deborah knew he was right. The question wasn't whether the pattern had ended. It was who would be next to hear the voice. Benjamin returned to Lena Marquez's research cabin to retrieve the vault of old recordings. What he found made his skin crawl. The vault had been broken into. The metal lock was warped inward, as if pulled, not forced. Inside, every cassette tape remained, except one, the unlabeled tape, the one with only the breathing. Deborah, back in Elmridge, woke that same night from a dreamless sleep, drenched in sweat. In her dream, there had been no visuals, only sound, breathing. Then the unmistakable phrase whispered in her ear, "You opened it again." She rushed to the living room. The red recorder was still there, batteries removed, untouched. But across the room, on the floor under the radiator, was a tape she didn't recognize, labeled in handwriting not her own. "She's waiting." Her hands trembled as she turned it over. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. Her mind returned to the broken vault, to the missing tape, to the force that had once said it spoke through what children loved most. Now it was speaking through something else, her memories, her guilt, her fear. The voice was no longer limited to Marissa. It had found a new language, and she had just heard its first sentence. Determined not to run, Deborah brought the new tape to Benjamin. They played it in the lab under controlled conditions. What emerged was unlike anything before. The audio contained layered signals, voices speaking over one another in dozens of tones, male and female, old and young. One word, however, repeated clearly through them all. "Trade." Benjamin looked at her. "Trade what?" Deborah felt her stomach twist. "Not what," she said. "Who?" As they analyzed the tape's structure, they discovered hidden beneath the main signal was a child's laughter, not Marissa's. This was new. A girl's voice neither of them recognized. Benjamin's computer, running voice-matching algorithms, flagged a possible match. A recent missing girl from Ohio. Age 9, gone without a trace. Deborah stared at the data. It's still happening. Benjamin leaned forward. It's offering a deal. Deborah's blood turned to ice. Give one. Get one. The implication was clear. Save one child. Lose another. They sat in silence as the recording continued. At the end of the tape, a voice whispered softly, almost gently. Pick carefully. Deborah pressed stop. This was no longer about saving Marissa. This was something much larger. A system. An economy. And it had just named her a participant. That night, Deborah made a choice. She returned to Marissa's room and placed the new tape inside the red recorder, now functional once more. She whispered, "If you're going to speak, speak to me, not them." The recorder clicked. Marissa's voice returned, soft, tired, older than before. "Mum, don't listen. Don't let it in again." Then silence. Deborah waited, heart pounding. The red light blinked, but nothing else came. She sat for hours. Finally, at 3:12, the recorder activated by itself. The voice that followed was low, masculine, unfamiliar. "We gave you back what was yours. Now give us what's next." Deborah didn't respond. The device continued. "We chose her for a reason. You broke the chain, but it never ends. It only moves." Then, a final message, whispered with terrifying clarity. "You can't save them all, but you can choose who disappears next." Deborah stood slowly, her mind racing. The choice wasn't just between children. It was between letting go and opening the door again. She walked to the fireplace and held the tape over the flame. "Not this time," she whispered, and let it fall. The plastic hissed. The voice inside screamed. And somewhere far away, another recorder began to blink. In the weeks that followed, Deborah noticed subtle changes. The lights no longer flickered at 3:12. The recorder remained dark, even with fresh batteries. The house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. And most importantly, the silence stayed. She reached out to families of other missing children, sharing what she'd uncovered. Most didn't believe her. Some listened. A few had heard the same lullabies, the same whispers. One mother admitted to hearing her daughter's voice speak from a baby monitor after midnight, repeating a name no one in their family had ever known. Deborah marked every incident, building a new timeline, one free of police blind spots and ignored mothers. She still kept the red recorder, now locked in a lead-lined box, buried behind her home, but she never touched it again. Some nights she dreamed of Marissa, older, smiling, whole, walking just beyond the tree line in the woods. She never called out. She never came closer, but she always looked peaceful. Deborah had made her choice. She hadn't reopened the door, and maybe, for now, that was enough to keep it closed for someone else. But the pattern had not stopped. In a town 4 states away, a girl named Brielle Foster disappeared from her bedroom on December 14th. Her parents found the window unlatched, the bed sheets undisturbed, and a single object left behind on the pillow, a yellow plastic recorder with no batteries inside. Authorities once again found no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The case baffled local police. News spread quickly through online forums and true crime podcasts. One night, While listening to an interview with Brielle's parents, Deborah recognized something chilling in the background, the faint melody of a lullaby she hadn't heard in months. She slammed her laptop shut, hands trembling. The pattern had returned, but it hadn't circled back to her. It had evolved. Deborah realized she wasn't a survivor of something finished. She was a witness to something still unfolding, and that knowledge came with a price. She began to write everything down in a private journal, logging the dates, recordings, and whispers. "If it starts again," she wrote in bold ink, "and I am not here to warn them, this will be the only map they have." 2 years later, a young woman arrived in Elmridge claiming to be a freelance reporter researching unsolved disappearances. She was 23, sharp-eyed, polite. She found Deborah through public records and asked for an interview. Reluctantly, Deborah agreed. They met at a small coffee shop in town. The woman asked vague questions at first, timelines, police theories, local history, but then she leaned forward, lowered her voice, and asked, "Have you ever heard a child whisper from a toy without batteries?" Deborah froze. She stared into the woman's eyes, and for the briefest moment, she saw something flicker behind them, a knowing, quiet calculation. "Who sent you?" Deborah asked. The woman smiled gently. "We're not sent. We're found." She slid a small object across the table, a recorder, same model, same faded red light. Deborah didn't touch it. The woman stood, tucked her hands into her coat, and said, "They never stopped. They just learned how to ask for permission." Then she walked out, leaving Deborah staring at the machine. The cafe noise faded around her. Somewhere inside her chest, she felt that old weight returning. Not fear, responsibility. The story wasn't over. It had just changed hands. Deborah never opened the recorder the young woman left behind. Instead, she placed it in a secure box and buried it next to the ashes of the one she had burned. She spent the following months preparing. No longer reactive, no longer naive. She gathered old records, collected the names of every child tied to the pattern, and reached out to researchers across the country who had once been dismissed. A network began to form, silent, scattered, but watchful. They called themselves the Wake, not investigators, not activists, witnesses, protectors. Deborah led quietly, never public, always watching for signs. They found others, drawings that mirrored Marissa's, audio clips from baby monitors, recurring names spoken by toddlers who couldn't yet read. It became clear the entity hadn't been destroyed, only slowed, distracted, possibly fractured, but it was learning. Every child who heard it responded differently. Some were drawn in, some resisted, but every one of them listened. Deborah wrote one rule in her final journal: never answer the voice, only record it. Truth speaks in playback. She left the journal hidden behind Marissa's bookshelf, hoping one day someone would find it before another tape did. On December 14th, just before midnight, Deborah sat alone at her kitchen table. No recorder, no candles, just a blank page in front of her and a pen in her hand. She wrote one final message. If you're reading this, you've already heard it. She folded the paper, placed it inside the hollow of Marissa's old teddy bear, and stitched it shut. Then she stood, opened the window, and listened. Silence. But it was a heavy silence, like something waiting just beyond the reach of breath. She whispered, "Not tonight," and shut the window again. Outside, the wind stirred. In a different house, in a different state, a child hummed softly in her sleep. A blinking light glowed under her blanket. In the morning, The recorder would be gone, and so would she. But in Elmridge, Deborah Hale slept soundly, knowing her story, her warning, had already begun to echo beyond her. Whether someone would hear it in time, she could not say, but she had spoken, and in a world of silence and whispers, that mattered. If this story left you unsettled, it's because some voices don't fade, they wait. Hidden justice is where these stories live on, pass through rooms, through years, through breathless silence. Every detail you just read was a warning, a plea, and a map for whoever comes next. Subscribe now, share this story, and become part of the few who choose to listen before it's too late. Somewhere, a light is blinking, and someone is about to press record. Let's make sure they know the truth before the tape plays again. This isn't just a story, it's a signal. Stay awake.